America's conversation about healthcare. On one level, you've seen this chart before. It shows healthcare spending as a share of the economy of a bunch of countries. There's Germany and France and Japan and Canada, and oh, there's America. But now I want to add something you haven't seen to this chart. This is how much of that spending in each country is private and how much is public. Here's what's amazing. America's government spending on healthcare, on programs like Medicaid and Medicare and the VA, our versions of socialized medicine, it's about the same size as these other countries. These countries where the government runs the whole healthcare system. And then there's our private spending. It's the private insurance system that makes healthcare in America so expensive. Conventional wisdom says the government is more expensive than the private sector. It can't say no, it's corrupt, it's inefficient, it's slow. You want something done right, you give it to the private sector. That is here in America all the time. And yet here we are with the biggest private...
Those charts do not say what he says they are saying. Total spending doesn't say how much waste is there. Total spending isn't good or bad. Total spending is just total spending. It doesn't have anything to do. It tells us nothing. It doesn't tell us which is a government or the private sector that is driver of high prices. It doesn't say that. It can't say that. Even to imply that it says that is to misunderstand reality on a very fundamental level. So I would say that we don't need to go any further. Anyone who states that as his thesis has nothing to tell us about that subject.
And what do you see as his thesis? What do you
What
see
he just said is that he was saying that people tell us that it's the government sector that's the driver of high prices. That it's so what he does is he has the government sector, and then he adds spending. The spending on top of that is private sector spending, and he says that's an indicator of our higher prices. That is nincompoopery on such an amazing level. Who is this person?
Oh, it's Ezra Klein on Vox. Vox has a lot of videos.
Doesn't Ezra Klein pretend to be an economist of some sort?
I don't know if he's ever identified himself as an economist. Yeah, this did strike me as very odd.
It's embarrassingly dumb. That's all we really need to say. That no one should go further. This is the red flag: is that if you think that those numbers, those graphed, have anything to do with prices or drivers of prices directly in terms of spending or overspending, we don't know. And also, that's an embarrassingly weird thing to say.
So if somebody is looking at this who doesn't have a lot of background in I don't know, data collection and how economic thinking, how would somebody approach a claim like this? He's going to start trying to make the case that the problem with American healthcare spending is clearly the private sector, because look, the public sector spends actually a little bit less than a lot of other Western developed countries. But the private spending is just out of control, and that's what's causing all of our problems. So how does a layman approach this and say, wait a minute, what is actually happening in this chart as compared to what he claims is happening in the chart?
Assuming he didn't explain this, but I'm assuming it's per capita spending that he's talking about. So we're talking about per capita spending because, the United States is huge. So compared to other countries, it has to be per capita spending. He didn't say that, did he? It's healthcare spending as a share of GDP. Oh, that's what it is. Sorry, I didn't look at that. Even that doesn't make a difference. None of this tells you the fact that we don't know whether it's not how much spending that determines what prices are or anything. It's how the money is spent. That's and who decide, it's all about that. And also the case for private healthcare is not the current system, is not even the current private system, because the current system is so weirdly rigged. So once again, on another level, it's just inapposite to an amazing degree. It has nothing to do with reason.
Let's see what point he wants to make. Let's see what point he thinks he's going to make.
Private spending. It's the private insurance system that makes healthcare in America so expensive. Conventional wisdom says the government is more expensive than the private sector. It can't say no, it's corrupt, it's inefficient, it's slow. You want something done right, you give it to the private sector. That is what we hear in America all the time. And yet here we are with the biggest private sector spending the most. Why is a free market so bad at controlling the cost of healthcare in the United States?
Okay, stop. What I assumed he was saying.
Well, look, Till, this has got this within the first day, November 30th. This had almost 500,000 views. So to dismiss it out of hand is to ignore the fact that a lot of people appear to find this compelling. And what I want to do is try to dissect what's going on here. Why have 500,000 people in one day already watched this? Why have 29,000 people favored it? What's going on in people's minds when they look at something like this?
Well, because it's confirmation bias. People want to hear this desperately because they want somebody to take care of them and they want to live at other people's expense. And they think that that's somehow going to make everything cheaper. Well, there's a whole bunch of, there are just so many assumptions here that he is brushing right over. For instance, if America is spending more than other countries, maybe they're not spending enough. For instance, we know that Canada has it really has an inefficient system and many people do not get served at all, or takes months and years even to get some kinds of services that we take for granted in America to get right away. So maybe we're just paying for that service to get fast service. And in Canada, they can't because it's the government deciding for them. Okay. And this is just it's just one way that this is all silly. And for young people, this is often driven by young people. Young people want to believe this desperately because they're the easiest ones to take care of in a socialist system, right? And it's hard to take care of older people dying. And of course, we don't do a bad job in this country. And Medicare I don't even say Medicare is even doing that horrible of a job. I think that actually Medicare overinvests and they spend more on money than people would themselves. So I suspect that we do overspend on healthcare. But why do we know that? I mean, the question before America is not, do we spend too much on, total on healthcare? That's not the issue. What's really question is do the prices make any sense? And we have every reason to believe that none of the prices make any sense because it's all built into a system that's goofy on all levels because it's mainly third-party providers. We treat healthcare insurance in the private sector differently than insurance in any other sector. It's heavily regulated, and now it's going to be subsidized up the wazoo. This whole system is just goofy, and there's a sort of weird lip-smacking prurience to his gloating over what he sees as the problem. The government is so much more efficient than private sector. I'd like to ask him if take over other sectors that now run by the private sector. Does he think the government would be a better allocator of resources? He's not an idiot. He knows that if computers were taken away from Microsoft and Apple and Dell and all those, if they were, we would all be in deep doo-doo. We know that. We just know it for sure. Even if they were run on a utility basis rather than as a pure socialist government run and government paid for it all the way system. I mean, he knows that. So I think that he's just kind of deluded, and his followers want to believe something, and they want to believe it for some very obvious reasons. And they don't want to go looking into what it's like in other countries. And I just and percent of GDP, there's just so much nonsense going on here.
Let's go a little further. Like I say, this is something a lot of people are paying attention to, and I think we probably should
confuse his basic categories that he thinks that he can.
On physician visits and hospital discharges, you can get rid of one theory. Americans don't consume more healthcare than people in these other countries. We don't go to the doctor more than the Germans or the Japanese. In fact, we go to the doctor less. The difference between us and them is that we pay more. Every time we go to the doctor for everything from an angioplasty to a hip replacement, from a C-section to a pain reliever, in America, the price for the same procedure at the same hospital, it varies enormously depending on who is footing the bill. The price for someone with public insurance, like Medicare or Medicaid, is often the lowest price. These groups, they cover so many people that the government can demand lower prices from hospitals and doctors, and they get.
Yeah, well, that's part of the whole goofy system, The government, the hospitals, for instance, and the hospitals are the worst in many ways. The hospitals make these agreements with particular insurance companies and Medicare. They accept Medicare's offers, and then they just and they price things to cover all this. They want to stay in business, and they actually want to make a lot of money. So they price things to overprice things, and they hope they can nab some people into paying it. Yeah, that's the way it works, and it's partly because of Medicare and Medicaid. Other countries that have government medicine don't do it like our Medicare and Medicaid either, right? They don't do it like this. They have different systems in place that make a little more sense. And the idea that Medicare and Medicaid aren't drivers of this is if Medicare and Medicaid pay less than, let's say, Aetna. I don't know if Aetna has a healthcare insurance. I don't use them. That doesn't mean that that Medicare and Medicaid are not actually a problem. It could mean that actually Medicare and Medicaid patients are the ones that cost the hospitals more because they aren't recovering all their costs, and so they try to get it off of the private health insurers. And then there are the people who don't have any insurance, whom they give these huge trumped up bills. We know this is happening. People who argue for private medicine are not arguing for the current system. This is just so witless that you have to wonder, what is he thinking? Because I've read a lot of people on the subject of private healthcare, right? And none of us are arguing for the system that he is ascribing to the markets and private enterprise. We don't like the current system for the reasons that it is a subsidized and completely weirded out, trumped up system that kind of like the mortgage system that led up to the debacle of 2007 and 8. I mean, this is a system that's pumped full of money, and it's been set up by governments on policies on so many levels, from local and state all the way up to the federal government tax policy. And it's just bizarre. I mean, no, I'm not arguing. I do not want the current system. I just don't want more government on top of it or in replacement of it, because they don't know how to do it right, obviously, because they concocted the current goofy system as it is. And it just seems silly to me. This guy is pathetic.
Well, if this major speaker for the leftist reform of healthcare makes such an elementary mistake in just looking at data at the beginning, how can you communicate with people that are so stupid who don't understand how to read a chart like this one at the beginning?
Right. Well, people aren't stupid. They have limited attention spans, and they don't apply their full intelligence to something they want to believe. Remember, politics is a lot like religion. Most people don't spend a lot of time on theology. And if they do, they don't do comparative theology. They do the one theology they like. This is something we know about religions, is that all my religious friends and family, they study their theology. None of them who are very strongly religious comparative shop around. They don't go to Islam. They don't go to Hinduism. They don't go to the great texts of philosophy. They spiff their philosophy up, and that's entirely reasonable on these areas where you don't really have much control over it anyway. And the importance of a religion is not its truth value. It's value to your sense of peace, and so I mean, and that's what politics is for people. These people are cultists. They're cultists of a religion, and the religion is the state. So,
okay. So what we have here, though, is either Ezra Klein is too stupid to understand how to read a chart and yet still has tremendous influence over a lot of people, or he's trying to mislead a lot of people by misinterpreting the data on a chart. In either case, how do you fight somebody like that? Well,
it's hard. That's why all wisdom is hard. It's never been easy. Why do most people believe stupid things throughout human history? Because it's hard to come up with good information and reasoning on subjects wherein the data is really complicated, or the feedback loops to what you do and say compared to what the long-term effects are so attenuated. That's just the nature of these subjects. And I don't believe, really, let me take a step back. I don't believe Ezra Klein is stupid, and I don't believe he's a liar. I don't suspect that, really. I guess what we have is Ezra Klein may be smarter than you and me. He may be so smart that he can convince himself to believe something stupid, and that he knows on some deep down level is in his favor to believe. I mean, many of the smartest people in the world have believed really horrible, horrible, stupid things. And they believed it because it was in their interest to do so. But on the surface level, they're honest, because it's only on the subtle level. I mean, how do you decide on which path to go down in life when it comes to your basic religious, philosophical opinions? You do it on hunch. I mean, most people just do it on hunch and they explore a certain direction. I mean, I do that to some extent too. Everybody does that. But he's just gone on a certain direction that's so at variance with reality that he distorts the nature of the data he gets all the time. And that's why. So he's probably smarter than I am. It's just that he's so smart that he's convinced himself to believe something that stupid. That's my theory anyway.
Well, is there much point in going?
Well, no,
much
I don't think there's
further?
any point. I think this is just hopeless, but hopeless farrago. But that being said, people who find it convincing, maybe you should take every part of his arguments, and it's more helpful to see this if it's in print. So if you can get a transcript of what he's saying, and then look at the data, and then try to think of what are the causal factors here that really make up those data, and how do prices form? How are costs met in these various institutions? What are the influences those institutions face when they engage in any kind of transaction? And then try to then test what you're learning about that back against Ezra Klein's, what he's just been telling you. And I think that if you would actually do an honest research into this subject and are open and start consulting real economists, people who actually deal with this, there are people, for instance, there are economists whom I trust on the subject of healthcare. I can think of
Well, those fringe libertarian economists.
Well, kind of. They're fringe largely because they say things that aren't popular for people who are part of the main cult. And this is the real problem we're dealing with here is we're dealing with cultic behavior, and we're dealing with theology. It's the theology of the state. That's a metaphor, but it's very close to the truth. And if you want to believe something, you're going to find confirmation for your bias, and they do. And this is just an amazing farrago that he's found that confirms this idea that he's had for a long time. And what everybody really wants is that somebody else take care of them. And what they really want is that their class of people run society in the way that they want to run, and they're smarter and they can do it. And that is a huge class bias. I mean, one of the things we have going here is that I think what people have to realize is that the class bias in America is the class of people who run governments and run for office and make up the bureaus and make up the intelligentsia class that goes in and out of those governmental institutions. And Ezra Klein is part of that. And it's in his class bias to believe all the things he does, because if he believed what I believe is the truth, he would be working himself out of a job. There's only a very small amount of private money that's going into researching truth that does not fit the governmental paradigm. And a lot of research is just sort of, biased. And I'm not going to say that I'm not biased either. I'm just saying that the class bias in favor of statism is so strong and is in fact subsidized into the trillions of dollars every year because it's done on the public education level, it's done in the academy, it's done in the institutions. There's just a lot of resources being pushed.
That is the assumption that the state is the solution to
problems
any
the state
social problem. Yeah.
The state is the solution to the problems the state has defined. And the state has defined those problems largely because the state has caused those problems. And
we would define the state as that institution whose peculiar characteristic is the legal authority to use force.
Yeah. To use initiated force and to control people against their will, and not to just merely defend against usurpation and aggression.
Hence the title of this series, Why Freedom Doesn't Work. We're looking at, because most of the arguments we see in the mainstream press from the establishment are people trying to explain to us why we need to do what they want instead of pursuing freedom, instead of pursuing a course that doesn't involve forcing people to behave the way you want them to behave. That's the theme of this program. That's the theme of this series. That's what we're going to look at is, what's your argument that freedom doesn't work? Let's think about it.
And I would I guess what I'm telling you is I'm not explaining all the reasons why Ezra Klein's theories are bunk. I'm just trying to indicate the direction you should go to test those theories. And because it's complicated, I would actually first want to write it out. I would do exactly what I'm suggesting to others to do. I would do myself. I would take a transcript. I would look at the arguments in syllogistic and in data, as statements about data, and then I would see how does his arguments meet with actual social causation, not just simple statistical categories, because there's something elementary in statistics that people who are knowledgeable about statistics always say: correlation is not causation. It's causation we must understand to make any judgment on the nature of these problems. But a bunch of statistics about showing how much spending there is in the United States and compared it to other countries, that doesn't tell us about that doesn't tell us anything about causation. It gives us clues to what to look for, but it doesn't necessarily even prime us for my point of view. I'm just saying that it doesn't give Ezra Klein one leg to stand on until he's brought in other legs of his argument. You might say that his argument is not only based on huge presuppositions, but also quite a few enthymemes. There's missing points in his arguments, but he doesn't see those points, and he doesn't want to talk about those points because they would undermine his argument.
Okay, well, obviously we're stopping. If somebody has the grit to watch the rest of Ezra's video and thinks we've completely missed his point, please write it in the bottom. But there's only so much time in a person's life, and if in the first 3 minutes somebody is saying, laying down premises that are so weak, it's very difficult to continue.
I do have a stomach problem when it comes to these issues. Is that if somebody starts giving off really bad, they give off fallacies, basically, right and left, so to speak, right off the get-go, and builds everything off of fallacies, just bad inferences and syllogisms that don't work, and all that stuff. I don't really want to go on. I mean, I just want to move to somebody who's more intelligent. Well, that's once again, we're always caught in this thing. It's not a question of intelligence as such. It's a question of kind of philosophical rigor. We're dealing here with philosophical rigor, and I don't want to invest a lot in people who don't have any.
Okay, well, as I say, Klein is very popular and very influential. One day, 500,000 views. So make of that what you will.
Well, I make of it.
He's not somebody that can be ignored. He has somehow or another he has to be addressed.
Right.
He has to be either refuted or mitigated. So that's the reason I brought it up.
Well, there were a lot of the people who are very fond of this stuff are also the same people who ridicule, evangelical Christianity relentlessly. So let me put it in a way they can understand. Ezra Klein is a circuit preacher. He does it on the web, but basically his job is to go to, to groups of people and tell them a very popular story and make them feel good about that popular story, and make them also feel anger towards those who would oppose them. And so they don't like the ideas of sin and redemption. The people, people towards the left tend to really hate Christianity with a passion. This sort of astounds me.
I thought the left was all about sin and redemption.
Yeah, but they have a different form of sin and redemption. That's the point I'm trying to make, is that Ezra Klein is...
This is a right to some extent, but go ahead.
Oh, well, all politics is cultism. To some extent, it's all about that. It has to be about that, because all governmental and social issues, like I said before, the feedback loops are attenuated enough that making sense of them is difficult. It's just difficult. And so you form crutches, and you form these little groups, and it just becomes cultic very, very quick. As soon as anybody comes up with an opinion on something.
Is it useful, though, to point out the cultic nature? Because the minute you do, I find myself having to use words like progressive and left-wing and right-wing, which quickly turn into sort of meaningless name-calling. I never get any positive response when I use the word progressive, even if it's a useful term to describe a mindset.
Well, that's because these are tribes. Progressive and conservative, these are tribes. Or competing denominations of the cult of government. And, actually we should use the term from John Hosperus.
I think we need to make clear when we're talking about government, we're talking about an institution that accomplishes its goal by forcing people to do things they wouldn't otherwise do.
John Hospert's called
That's
it.
what we mean when we say government.
Though it's really the state, because John Hosper's called it the cult of the omnipotent state. And that's kind of what they're talking about here is government is so much better than other institutions. It's just so good at what it does that it can take care of us all and we don't have to pay for it. I mean, we only have to pay a little bit of taxes because we're not as rich as those guys over there. So the rich will pay for everything. And because government is so much more efficient, it won't even cost the rich that much. That's kind of the attitude that's going on here. And I don't find it very convincing. I've always found it a little bit strange, mainly because I know people in government and they aren't that brilliant, and they seem to be more self-interested than public interested when they actually come down to their actual jobs. And
what about this? At least there's a chance that people in government will be have a public interest at heart, whereas in the private sphere, we know there's no chance at all. It's just a bunch of people looking out for their own interests.
Well, that's not even true. We know that's true, not true on the face of it. But the point of when we're talking about works in the market system, in markets and through the price system, people are out for themselves, but they are limited in what they can do. People in the private sector don't get to go out and take money from your pocket. They don't get to look at this is what you made this year, so I get to take 10% of your money and here's some stuff for you. That's not what private sector does. That encourages true weird interest issues. But what a private sector person has to entice you to buy what he's selling, and that
with advertising.
Well, sometimes it is. Sometimes it is. You can say it's trickery, but at least it's you making the decision, and you really pretty much have only yourself to blame at the end of the day, because you can say no. I say no to all sorts of companies every day. Every day I choose to not cooperate with the bulk of mankind. I just deal with a few people, and I make purchases only from a very few companies, and that's it. I disregard most everybody else, and that means that Microsoft doesn't control me. They don't, because I'm not giving them any money anymore. I don't give money to Microsoft anymore. I've canceled my account, and that means that that big business has no power over me, unless, of course, whatever it does with other businesses,
or whatever
I'm not
favors it
that.
buys among bureaucrats.
Well, but government is government. I don't have any control over, not much control at all over what government does with my money, the money it takes from my pocket. But companies don't take from me
but see,
and
if
then give me stuff
though,
that
these are people you've elected who are trying to do good for you, whereas big businesses are just out for themselves.
Yeah, well, we were going to the basic farragos of statism, because, of course, I have never voted for anybody who's won on a level above dog catcher, I don't think. Maybe I've voted twice for state senators or something, maybe. I certainly never voted for a representative or a senator who's won. I've never voted for a president.
So you don't feel you're represented by these people?
I'm not represented at all by these people.
If they had one, would you feel that you were represented and government was working?
Well, there are maybe 3 or 4 people in Congress, the United States Congress, that I like right now and say things that are vaguely close to mine, but they don't get their way. So if they don't get their way, have I made a decision? Have I given free assent to
you're just mad
because
the majority won and you don't get what you want?
Well, it's not just bad. There's a lot of things the majority of people, it's irksome. It's irksome that I believe most people have really bad taste in music. And I believe most people have really bad taste in music. I don't want to hear most of the crap people listen to. There's some things they listen to I like, but not most. And I want to pay attention to what I consider good music, which is largely classical music. And because of that, because of my, this you might consider snobbishness, I kind of resent the majority. But they're at least spending their own money. And they're not telling me I can't spend my money buying the music I like, or favoring the composers I like and the performers I like. They're not doing that. In politics, they are. And so in politics, we have every reason to resent majorities. The majorities are assholes. There always will be assholes. And if you love majority government, there's probably something wrong with you because you're a tyrant.
You claim that musical tastes. Well, here's the case. Musical tastes are so horrible because the free market appeals to the lowest common denominator, and so we have outrages like Britney Spears earning millions and millions while Albert Einstein hardly earns anything. Whereas
Well, he
the
was a bad
people who
violinist too.
are supporting things like the classical music you like are public radio, are government run institutions like the NEA. So they want to give you what quality and what's good, whereas the market just
However,
wants to give you dreck. So
that's not quite true. But there's some truth to that, partly because one of the reasons we have the dreck around us is not really because there's a market in the formation of tastes. For one thing, most people's tastes are determined in their teen years, and the teen years are determined while they're in the prisons known as public schools, which the government provides, and we have a permanent color culture that grows up in the interstices of classrooms, and there people develop their really goofy tastes, and they're badly educated on music, with teachers generally who don't know how to teach music, and there's also another element too here too. So what I'm saying is that there's a lot of elements. The whole music industry of popular music is geared to people who who've been sort of programmed to like what they want in some sense because of just the horrendous nature of education in our time. And I don't really blame people for why do people believe stupid things about anything, or don't know very many things? It's because they've been educated in really bad environments. But that's beside the point. Classical music will always be probably a minority taste because it requires more processing power to enjoy, and most people aren't smart enough for it.
Do pay off direct better than they pay off original quality work, right?
Well, not necessarily. I mean, because markets do pay some people off who are very, very good, very well. I mean, there have been some real musicianship all around the popular music sphere, and I don't want to make fun of them because there's a lot that I like. But Britney Spears, and even Britney Spears, is not that horrible. I mean, compared to what the stuff I hear today on the radio or whatever passes for radio, Britney Spears is Bach. But I was never a Britney Spears fan.
Yeah, I don't mean to be ragging on Britney. I was trying to think of a pop star.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think these people are all that great, but they have their values, and I understand why people like them. I mean, because music, even simple music has very, very strong charms, and I don't really want to. And you'd expect if most people don't pay much attention to music, right? Music is just sort of a side thing, and they really like this artist or that because it speaks to them in some simple way, and it's not even really dreck. It's just enough for normal people, and they will determine the market. And that's why I said I kind of resent them. I could, because they do promote people who are not as good as other people. But I think the solution to all this is that people have better education, so that during the formative years of their lives, they are in contact with culture that is not so relentlessly mind-numbingly stupid. And one of the things about public schools is that in the classroom and without, generally, it is folly and tribalism that reigns. And that's where most people get their ideas of music. And of course, there's a difference between people who themselves are musicians and the people who are not musicians. Because anyone who takes up a guitar and starts learning it starts actually developing an ear. I mean, you're one of those people. You've composed amazing songs that I couldn't compose. So I see a lot of great stuff around. It's just once again in the market. Also, by the way, I would have no problem with a complete defunding of the classical music sphere. Most of that is garbage too. A and B. I think that we could have a lot of more economies of scale, because if there are truly fewer venues of smaller demand for something, there should be fewer suppliers, and they should be winnowed out through the market. That's fine. I have no problem with that. It could very well be that there will only be 1,000 people on the planet who make really, really, really good livings at classical music. That's fine. Just as long as there's a few good orchestras doing stuff, that's fine. And then over time, we'll develop, in a free market, we would develop better music. But as it is right now, we have a very strange society we live in. Once again, I'm not defending current society. After all, our society is run largely by people who've been put through a system that is dreadful. And that is the public education system and the higher education in this country, which is pretty much run by government. And that's just insane. Both
Of
both
course,
those categories.
education is bad because we don't give it enough. We don't give it the money it needs because conservatives are constantly standing in the way of funding education because they want the public to be stupid so they can take advantage of them.
No, that's not, of course, that's not a good interpretation. That's yeah. Well, but a lot of people, they have a problem with that thesis in my lifetime. In fact, with our you might say our adult lifetime, uh, public education per student more than doubled in public expenditures to student, adjusted for inflation, and yet education didn't even maintain an even keel during that period of time. It's not great. It didn't. We have lots of people not graduating, a lot of people not reading well when they graduate, a lot of people are incompetent, a lot of people are very, very, they just haven't been exposed to much. Their skill levels are low in all sorts of things. Math is notoriously low.
And of course, the one we've been discussing.
More money won't do it.
The problem we've been discussing is that they haven't been taught how to think. They haven't been taught how to appraise, data that's placed in front of them. They've been and school has functioned more as a tool for conditioning political obedience than for creating
kind of. I think schools are so bad that they don't do a good job of that either. So there's hope for humanity in the fact that they're not good propagandists. No, though I think they're better than they have been in the past.
I don't know. A lot of the assumptions I see in most political arguments, I can see traced back to the civics classes I had or the history classes I had.
Yeah,
I mean, I can hear the moment I was told about the robber barons, or I can hear the moment I was told about the danger of big business and we are the people. Those are all so deeply embedded in us in such a young age. That's pretty clearly something that the public education does pretty effectively.
Yeah, I suppose. However, a lot of people forget that stuff and aren't interested in that stuff. So those people are the hope for the future.
We forget most of our assumptions. Aren't our assumptions sort of laying there in the center of the clamshell?
Right. Yeah. This is one of the good things about having religion in society, is that it's a competing group of really bad ideas that go to the heart of human nature. And because of that, going to the heart of human nature, and people have alternative commitments. And when they have alternative commitments, they drop the extremity of their commitment to the state. And thus they can think a little bit more clearly. In fact, that's one of the things we find that people who are very religious, I may not share their religion, and I don't share anybody's religion, but even if I did share one group's religion, all the others I wouldn't share. But all those groups of people who are very religious, they tend to be less statist than other people, for the simple reason that they've committed their hearts, you might say, to something that's not the state.
Well, how about Muslims? Muslims are all about building theocratic states, right? I mean, at least the Muslims in the Muslim countries are all about building theocratic states, aren't they?
Not quite. They have it's kind of more perverse for Muslims, because at the heart of their idea is not theocratic state so much as a theocratic basic legal order. It's Sharia law. It's the idea that it's the basic constitutional principle, because there isn't really a big statist element in Islam as such. What there is a strong in-group, out-group in Islam, and that's where that gets really bad. And that's a problem with all. But Muslims can be convinced pretty easily that big states are a bad idea. They just want to have their tyrannies at a local level, which is unfortunate. That's one of the reasons I dislike Islam so much, is it's full of perverse ideas on many levels.
All perversity is local, I think, is the...
That's, yeah. And which means that they're not immune to looking around the world and seeing that their tyrannies are only good for really violent people. And though they've been violent for a long time, many of those countries, the people, when they get a taste for freedom, even Iran is
they do seem to be able to rebound given the right circumstances. And almost certainly the right circumstances don't include a foreign power coming in And
Right. So that's a lot of the world is messed up by bad policy and bad thinking, and we have to just sort of try to unmess it in our heads, and that is difficult. And we should give people the benefit of the doubt that this is a difficult world to understand, especially in the social aspects and philosophically and religiously, the areas where people have the most discord. And then of course there's self-interest, the clash of interests. That's a problem as well.